The day my daughter handed me an eviction notice, I was standing in the kitchen of the house my husband and I had built 43 years earlier. "You have 30 days. "Mom," Claire said without looking me in the eyes. Her husband, Daniel, stood beside her with his arms folded while I stared at the papers shaking in my hands. My name was on the deed. My memories were inside those walls. My late husband, Richard, had died in the bedroom upstairs. "How can you throw me out of my own home?" I asked. Claire whispered. "Because legally, it isn't only yours anymore." Just as I felt my entire world collapsing, an elderly lawyer walked through my front door carrying a worn leather folder that had belonged to my husband. And what he read from it would change everything if you've ever trusted someone simply because they were family. I hope you'll stay with me until the end of this story. Please like and subscribe if stories like this speak to your heart. And I'd truly love to hear your thoughts. What would you do if your own child asked you to leave your home? Please leave a comment sharing your feelings. And tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. People often ask me why I never sold the house after my husband died. The truth is simple. That house was never just wood, brick, and paint. It was Richard. It was me. It was our entire life. My name is Audrey Hamilton. I am 68 years old, and for most of my life, I taught second grade at a public elementary school in Columbus, Ohio. My husband, Richard Hamilton, was a civil engineer. He believed in building things that lasted, including our marriage. We met when I was 21. He had grease on his hands and sawdust on his jacket when he asked me to dinner. 30 days later, he proposed. 45 years later, he died. Sometimes life feels that short. The house sat on a quiet street lined with maple trees. Richard designed most of it himself. We could not afford contractors for everything, so he spent weekends building walls, laying floors, and installing cabinets. I helped paint. Claire helped when she became old enough to hold a brush. Every room had a memory. The kitchen was where Claire learned to bake cookies. The living room was where Richard danced with me every Christmas. The back porch was where we watched thunderstorms together. After Richard passed away from heart failure, the house became very quiet. Too quiet. For months, I slept on only one side of the bed. I left his slippers beside the closet. His coffee mug stayed in the cabinet. People told me to move. I refused. "This house keeps me close to him," I always said. My daughter Claire understood that at first. She visited every Sunday. She brought groceries. She helped me with the yard. Sometimes we sat on the porch for hours. I truly believed we had survived the worst thing a family could experience. I was wrong. The changes began after Claire married Daniel Bennett. At first, I liked him. He was handsome, confident, and successful. He worked in real estate investment and always talked about opportunities. He shook my hand firmly the first time we met. "You raised an amazing daughter, Audrey." I smiled. "Take care of her." "I will." For several years, everything seemed normal. They had 2 children. They bought a beautiful home. Daniel drove expensive cars and wore expensive watches. But something slowly changed. Every time they visited, Daniel talked about money, Interest rates, housing prices, investments, property values. One afternoon, he stood in my backyard looking at the house. This place must be worth nearly $700,000 now. I laughed. I honestly don't know. He nodded. That's serious money. I did not think much about it. Richard used to discuss home values too. But Richard always talked about memories. Daniel only talked about numbers. Months later, I noticed something else. Whenever Claire came alone, we talked about family. Whenever Daniel came, we talked about the house. He asked about insurance, property taxes, the mortgage, the deed. At first, I answered politely. Eventually, it began to bother me. One evening I said to Claire after Daniel left the room, "He certainly likes talking about this house." She laughed. "Mom, that's just his business." "Maybe. You worry too much." I wanted to believe her. After Richard died, loneliness makes you trust the people closest to you even more. Claire was my only child. I never imagined I would need to protect myself from her. That winter, I found one of Richard's notebooks in the attic. He had written small reminders inside. Fix porch railing, replace gutters, take Audrey to Maine. One sentence caught my attention. Always make sure Audrey is protected. I smiled when I read it. Richard worried about everything. He worried when Claire got her driver's license. He worried when she left for college. He worried when I caught the flu. I remember telling him once, "You can't protect me forever." He kissed my forehead. "I'll try anyway." At the time, I thought he was being romantic. Years later, those words would haunt me. Spring arrived. Claire started visiting more often. She seemed distracted, tired. She talked less about her children and more about bills. Daniel had invested in several development projects. Some were delayed, some had problems, but she insisted everything was fine. One afternoon, she stood beside me while I watered flowers. "Mom, have you ever thought about downsizing?" I looked up. "No. You don't need all this space." "I like my space." She smiled. "You could move somewhere easier." I turned off the hose. "Are you asking because you're worried about me?" She hesitated. "Of course, but something in her eyes felt different. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen. The grandfather clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. The house felt unusually cold. For the first time in years. I walked upstairs and opened Richard's closet. His jackets still hung there. I touched one sleeve. "I miss you," I whispered. Sometimes I talk to him. Widows do that. We talk to photographs. We talk to empty chairs. We talk to silence. The following Sunday, Claire and Daniel came for dinner. Daniel walked slowly through the living room. He examined the fireplace, the windows, the hardwood floors. Finally, he said, "Richard really built something special." I smiled. "He did." Daniel looked at me. "A property like this should stay in the family." I agreed. "That's exactly what Richard wanted." Daniel smiled. But something about that smile unsettled me. When they left that evening, Margaret Wilson, My neighbor of 30 years walked over. She had watched Claire grow up. She knew my family almost as well as I did. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." She looked toward Claire's car driving away. "Why does your son-in-law stare at your house like he's shopping for it?" I laughed. "Margaret, I'm serious. He's in real estate." She crossed her arms. "Maybe, but be careful." I frowned. Claire would never hurt me. Margaret looked at me for several seconds. Then she quietly said something I never forgot. "Sometimes good people change when money enters the room." That night, I could not sleep. I kept hearing her words, and somewhere deep inside me, a small feeling began to grow. Fear. Not because I thought my daughter would betray me, but because, for the first time, I wondered if I truly knew the people standing closest to me and downstairs, sitting inside Richard's old desk. There was a leather folder neither Claire nor I had opened since the day of his funeral. The first paper I signed did not frighten me. Neither did the second. That is how people lose things. Not all at once. One signature at a time. About 3 months after Margaret warned me about Daniel, Claire began visiting more often. She came alone several times, which actually made me happy. I thought perhaps she wanted to spend time with me. One afternoon, she arrived carrying coffee and a small folder. "Mom, can we sit down for a minute?" I smiled. "Of course." She spread several papers across my kitchen table. "What are those?" "Just some property paperwork." I frowned. "What kind of paperwork?" She took a sip of coffee. "Nothing serious. Daniel says there are some tax advantages if we update a few records." I looked at her. "Update what?" "The house insurance, emergency contact information, some ownership information." I immediately felt uncomfortable. "I don't understand these things." Claire reached over and touched my hand. "Mom, it's only paperwork." I trusted my daughter. That was my mistake. She pointed to several places. "Sign here." I signed. "Here too." I signed again. She smiled. "Perfect." I asked. "Should I read them?" She laughed. "You trust me, don't you?" I laughed too. "Of course I do." At 68, I thought trust between a mother and daughter was automatic. I never imagined paperwork could become a weapon. A few days later, Margaret came over while I was trimming flowers. She noticed the folder sitting on the kitchen counter. "What's that?" "Claire had me sign some insurance papers." Margaret looked at me. "Did you read them?" I shook my head. She frowned. "Audrey, never sign anything without reading it." "It's Claire." "That doesn't matter." I felt annoyed. "You're being suspicious." Margaret sighed. "I'm being old." I laughed, but she didn't. She stood beside me quietly. "My husband lost half his retirement because he trusted his nephew. Claire isn't like that." "I hope not." I wanted to end the conversation because the truth was simple. Margaret's words scared me, and I didn't want to be scared. The next Sunday, Daniel came with Claire. He brought pastries. He was unusually friendly. He helped wash dishes. He asked about my medications. He even fixed a broken cabinet door. At one point, he said, "You know, Audrey, Claire worries about you living alone." "I'm fine." "Of course, but someday you'll need help." I smiled. "Someday." He nodded. "We just want everything organized before that happens." Something about that sentence stayed with me. Before that happens, as if they had already decided my future. Several weeks passed. Spring turned into early summer. One morning, I received a phone call from an insurance company. The woman asked, "Mrs. Hamilton, are you confirming the ownership update?" I became confused. What ownership update? There was silence. "Perhaps you should contact your representative." The call ended. I immediately called Claire. "Did you change something with the house?" She sounded irritated. "Mom, we talked about this." "I don't remember changing ownership." "It's not ownership." "Then what is it?" "Just paperwork." I wanted to ask more questions. Instead, I said, "Okay." That evening, I sat alone in Richard's office. His desk still stood beside the window. Inside the top drawer were old receipts, pens, and business cards. I found an envelope with Samuel Carter's name on it. Samuel had been Richard's attorney for years. I had not seen him since Richard's funeral. The envelope was unopened. Before I could examine it, my phone rang. It was Claire. "Mom, Daniel and I are stopping by tomorrow." "Why? We have another document." My stomach tightened. "What document?" "It's easier if we explain in person." The next afternoon, they arrived together. Daniel carried a leather folder. Claire seemed nervous. We sat at the kitchen table. Daniel opened the folder. "This is mostly about emergency planning." "What kind of planning?" He smiled. "If something happens to you." I looked at him. "Nothing is happening to me." "Of course not. But everyone should prepare." Claire avoided my eyes. Daniel slid another document toward me. "What's this?" "A transfer authorization." I frowned. "A transfer of what?" "Future management rights." "I don't understand." Claire finally spoke. "It would allow me to help with financial decisions if necessary." I stared at my daughter. Necessary because of what? "Mom, please don't make this difficult." Those words hurt. I had never heard Claire speak to me like that. I picked up the document. The legal language confused me. I could not understand half of it. Daniel pointed to the signature line. "This is standard." I looked at Claire. She nodded. "It's fine." I wanted to trust her, but for the first time, I hesitated. Richard used to say, "When people rush you, slow down." Daniel was rushing me. "Can I think about it?" I asked. His smile disappeared. "It's time sensitive." "Then I'll read it." He leaned back. "That's your choice." The room became quiet. Finally, Claire said, "Mom, we're trying to help." I signed. Even today, I can still see the pen moving across that paper. One signature. A simple signature. Nothing dramatic. No music. No warning. Just ink. After they left, I sat alone at the table. I suddenly felt exhausted. That evening, Margaret stopped by. She immediately noticed my expression. "What happened?" "I signed another document." Her face changed. Did you read it? Not completely. She sat down. Audrey, this has to stop. I became defensive. Claire is my daughter. And people make mistakes. Not Claire. Margaret looked at me carefully. Maybe not. But what about Daniel? I had no answer. 2 days later, I walked into the living room and found Claire standing near Richard's desk. She quickly closed a drawer. What are you doing? She looked surprised. Oh, I was looking for old insurance papers. I noticed an envelope in her hand. The envelope from Samuel Carter. What's that? She immediately placed it inside her purse. Nothing important. I felt confused. That belonged to your father. I'll bring it back. She changed the subject. How are your medications? But I was no longer listening, because for the first time in my life, my daughter had hidden something from me. And when she left that afternoon, I stood at the window watching her drive away. I remembered Margaret's words. Sometimes, good people change when money enters the room. That night, I opened Richard's closet again. I held his old jacket against my chest, and for the first time since his death, I said something aloud. Richard, if you can hear me, I need your help. Because somewhere inside me, a terrible feeling had started growing. I had signed something. I did not know what it was. And I was beginning to fear that my daughter knew exactly what it meant. 3 weeks after I signed the last document, Claire invited me to dinner. She sounded cheerful. Mom, the kids miss you. I smiled. I miss them too. Come over Friday. I spent the entire afternoon baking Richard's favorite apple pie. Claire used to love it when she was a little girl. For a moment, I felt hopeful. Maybe the strange tension between us was ending. Maybe I had imagined everything. When I arrived at Claire's house, the grandchildren ran toward me. Grandma, I hugged them tightly. The smell of roasted chicken filled the kitchen. For a while, everything felt normal. Claire laughed. The children played. Daniel opened a bottle of wine. I almost forgot my worries. Almost. Halfway through dinner, Daniel put down his fork. We need to discuss something. The room became quiet. Claire looked at her plate. I felt my stomach tighten. What is it? Daniel folded his hands. The housing market is very strong right now. I stared at him. What does that have to do with dinner? Claire finally looked at me. Mom, we think it's time to sell the house. I blinked. What? Daniel spoke calmly. The market may drop next year. I looked at my daughter. Why would I sell my house? Claire took a deep breath. You don't need that much space anymore. I put down my fork. I live there. Daniel nodded. But eventually, you'll need help. I don't need help. Not today. I felt my face growing warm. I built that house with Richard. Claire looked uncomfortable. We know. Your father built every wall. Daniel interrupted. And the value is incredible. That sentence made me angry. Your father is not a property value. Nobody spoke. The children had stopped eating. Claire finally said, "Mom, we're trying to think ahead." "I already have." Daniel reached beside his chair and picked up a folder. My heart sank. A folder? Again? He opened it carefully. "There are some legal matters we should discuss." I looked at Claire. She would not look at me. Daniel slid papers across the table. I recognized my signature. My hands began to shake. "What is this?" Claire finally spoke. "The documents you signed." I looked closer. The legal language meant nothing to me, but I saw certain words: transfer, interest, ownership, beneficiary. My chest tightened. "What does this mean?" Daniel answered. "It means the house is partially protected under Claire's authority." I looked directly at my daughter. "What did you do?" She began to cry. "We were only trying to help." "No." My voice became louder. "What did you do?" Daniel spoke again. "You transferred certain rights." "I never agreed to that." "You signed." The word hit me like a slap. Signed. I remembered every paper, every smile, every promise, every time Claire said, "Trust me." The room felt smaller. I stood up. "Richard would never allow this." Daniel leaned back. "Richard isn't here." The silence that followed felt terrible. Claire whispered, "Daniel." But it was too late. He had said it. Richard wasn't here. And suddenly, I felt very alone. I looked at my daughter. "Do you want my house?" Tears rolled down her face. "It's not like that." "Then what is it?" "We have financial problems." There it was. The truth. At least part of it. Daniel sighed. "Several investments are struggling." "How much?" He didn't answer. I looked at Claire. "How much?" She whispered. "A lot." I felt sick. "So, you want to sell my home?" "No." "Then what?" Daniel finally spoke honestly. "The equity could help." I stared at him. "My husband's house?" "Our family's house." "The place where he died." He folded his arms. "It makes financial sense." I could not believe what I was hearing. Claire reached for my hand. "Mom." I pulled away. "Did you trick me into signing papers?" "No." "Did you tell me what they were?" She began crying harder. "We didn't want to upset you." I stood. "I think I should leave." The grandchildren looked frightened. Claire stood too. "Mom, please." I picked up my purse. At the door, Daniel said something I will never forget. "The property situation isn't exactly what you think." I turned around. "What does that mean?" He looked directly at me. "Legally, things have changed." I drove home shaking. Rain began falling halfway there. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my hands hurt. When I reached my driveway, I sat in the car for nearly 20 minutes. The house looked exactly the same. The porch light glowed. The curtains moved slightly. Richard's wind chime hung beside the door. Everything looked normal. but nothing felt normal. Inside, I walked directly into Richard's office. I opened the drawer where the envelope from Samuel Carter had been. It was gone. Claire had taken it. For the first time, anger replaced fear. Why would she take it? What was inside? I called her. She answered immediately. "Mom, where is the envelope?" Silence. "Claire, I don't know. Don't lie to me." She began crying again. "It's not important." "Then why did you take it?" "Daniel said." She stopped speaking. "What did Daniel say?" "Nothing. Claire. He said old legal papers only confuse people." I sat down. "Did he read them?" "I don't know." "Bring them back." "I'll look." I hung up. An hour later, Margaret knocked on my door. She took one look at me. "What happened?" I told her everything. Every word. Every paper. Every conversation. She listened quietly. When I finished, she said something that made my blood run cold. "Audrey, I think they're preparing to take your house." I immediately shook my head. "No. You just told me they discussed ownership." "They wouldn't do that." Margaret sat beside me. "You said Daniel had papers." "Yes." "You said you signed documents." "Yes." "You said Claire took an envelope from Richard's lawyer." I closed my eyes. She gently held my hand. "You need legal advice." I looked around the room. Richard's photograph sat beside the fireplace. His smile looked exactly the same. Suddenly, I remembered something. The year before he died, Richard had been very serious one evening. "If anything ever feels wrong, call Samuel." At the time, I asked why. He simply said, "Promise me." I had forgotten until that moment. Margaret stood. "Do you still have Samuel's number?" I opened Richard's old address book. The number was still there. My hand shook as I picked up the phone. It was nearly 9 o'clock. I almost put it down. Then I heard Daniel's voice in my head. "Legally, things have changed." I dialed. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. Finally, an older voice answered. "Samuel Carter speaking." I swallowed. "My name is Audrey Hamilton." There was silence. Then he quietly said, "Richard told me you might call someday." The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning. I remember the exact date, October 14th. The sky was gray. Rain had fallen all night. I was making coffee when I heard someone place something inside my mailbox. At first, I thought it was a utility bill. Instead, it was the beginning of the worst week of my life. The envelope was thick. Certified mail. My name was printed across the front. I sat at the kitchen table and opened it. The words made no sense. Notice to vacate. 30 days. Property interest holders. Occupancy rights. My coffee cup slipped from my hand. Hot coffee spilled across the table. I read the paper again, and again. I could not breathe. The notice stated that changes in ownership interests had occurred and that arrangements should be made for me to vacate the property within 30 days. 30 days. My house. Richard's house. Our house? I immediately called Claire. She answered after several rings. Hello. What is this? Silence. Claire. She took a deep breath. I was going to talk to you. You sent me an eviction notice. It isn't exactly that. I felt my voice shaking. It says, I have 30 days. We need to discuss it. No. I stood up. No. You explain this right now. She began crying. Mom, please. Did you do this? Another silence. Then she quietly said, Daniel thinks this is the best option. Daniel. Again. Everything seemed to lead back to him. I hung up. 10 minutes later, my front door opened. Claire walked inside. Daniel followed behind her. He carried another folder. I suddenly hated folders. Claire's eyes were red. Daniel looked calm. Too calm. I held the notice in my hand. What is this? Daniel sat down. Audrey. You need to listen. No. You listen? Claire sat beside him. Mom. Please. I looked directly at my daughter. Did you send this? She nodded. My heart broke. Not because of the paper. Because she admitted it. I trusted you. She started crying again. We're trying to help. I laughed. Help. What a terrible word. You help people by feeding them. I held up the notice. You don't help people by removing them from their homes. Daniel leaned forward. The house situation has changed. What does that mean? You signed certain documents. I signed insurance papers. They involved ownership interests. No. Yes. I felt dizzy. You lied to me, Claire whispered. Mom. I looked at her. Did you know? She closed her eyes. Some of it. How much? She couldn't answer. Daniel answered for her. The transfer allows certain decisions regarding the property. My property. Our concern is your future. I slammed the paper onto the table. My future. You're 68. So, you live alone. So, eventually you may require care. I stared at him. You already decided that. Claire finally spoke. We thought assisted living would be easier. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You found a place for me. She nodded slowly. My own daughter had already chosen where I would live. Without asking me. Without telling me. I sat down because my legs felt weak. The kitchen suddenly felt unfamiliar. Everything seemed far away. I looked at Claire. When? She looked confused. When what? When did you stop being my daughter? She began sobbing. Daniel put his arm around her. That made me angry. He was comforting the person who had hurt me. I pointed toward the door. Leave. Claire looked up. Mom? Leave. Daniel stood. This doesn't help. Get out. He sighed. You have 30 days. I felt ice move through my body. He said it so casually. 30 days. As if I were renting a hotel room. As if Richard had not died upstairs. As if my entire life meant nothing. Claire stood. She walked toward me. I love you. I stepped backward. No. Her face fell. Mom. You don't do this to someone you love. She began crying harder. Daniel led her outside. At the door, he turned. We can still work this out. I said nothing. The front door closed, and I was alone. That afternoon, I walked through every room: the living room, the dining room, the upstairs hallway, Richard's office, our bedroom. I touched the walls, the banister, the fireplace. How do you pack 43 years into boxes? You don't. I sat on Richard's side of the bed. I remembered his final weeks, his hand in mine, his weak voice. Take care of yourself. I suddenly burst into tears. Not quiet tears, real tears, the kind that leave you exhausted. Because Richard was gone, and now Claire was gone too. Margaret arrived around 4 o'clock. She found me sitting on the floor. The notice lay beside me. She read it. Her face became pale. Oh my God. I couldn't speak. She sat beside me. This is real. I nodded. They want me out. No. I looked at her. What? She held the paper. This doesn't mean they own your house. It says 30 days. It says someone thinks they have rights. I felt hopeless. What's the difference? She stood up. The difference is lawyers. I remembered Samuel Carter, Richard's attorney, the man I had spoken to several nights earlier. I had left him a message. He called back the following morning. We had arranged to meet later that week. At the time, I thought it was only a precaution. Now it felt like my last chance. That evening, Claire called again. I ignored it. She called 6 times. Finally, she left a voicemail. Mom, please talk to me. Daniel says everything can still be solved. Daniel says, not I say. Daniel says, I deleted the message. At 7 o'clock, someone knocked on my door. For one terrible second, I thought it was Daniel. Instead, it was a delivery driver. He handed me another envelope. No return address. Inside was a brochure. A retirement community. Beautiful apartments. Group activities. Medical care. At the bottom, written in Claire's handwriting, this might be good for you. I stared at those words for a very long time. Not because they were cruel, because they sounded final. As if I had already left. As if my house already belonged to someone else. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I walked downstairs. I sat in Richard's chair. The clock ticked. Rain tapped against the windows. And then I remembered something. The leather folder. The one Samuel had once mentioned. The one Claire had taken. The one Richard had apparently wanted protected. For the first time since the notice arrived, a small feeling appeared. Hope. Because Richard never left things unfinished. And if he truly believed someday I might need Samuel Carter, then perhaps my husband had seen something I had not. The next morning, I picked up the phone. Samuel answered immediately. Audrey? Yes. His voice became serious. I think you should come see me today. Is it bad? There was a long silence. Finally, he said, I think your husband expected this day to come. I had not seen Samuel Carter in almost 7 years. The last time was at Richard's funeral. He had stood beside me at the cemetery wearing a black coat and holding an umbrella over my head while it rained. Before leaving, he shook my hand. If you ever need me, Audrey, call. At the time, I thought he was simply being kind. Now I was driving to his office because my daughter wanted me out of my own home. Life changes faster than people realize. Samuel's office sat in an old brick building downtown. The sign outside had faded. The waiting room looked exactly the same. Dark wood, old books, a grandfather clock. The receptionist smiled. Mrs. Hamilton. I nodded. Mr. Carter is waiting. Samuel stood when I entered his office. He looked older, thinner. His hair was completely white, but his eyes were still sharp. Audrey. He hugged me. For the first time in weeks, I felt safe. He pointed toward a chair. Sit down. I handed him the eviction notice. He read every page carefully. He never interrupted. When he finished, he removed his glasses. Tell me everything. And I did. The papers, the signatures, Daniel, Claire, the retirement home brochure, the missing envelope, everything. He listened for nearly an hour. When I finished, he leaned back. Richard was worried. I stared at him. Worried about what? He folded his hands. He loved Claire very much. I know. But he also knew she trusted people too easily. I felt confused. Claire has always been responsible. Samuel nodded. Richard thought so too, but during the last year of his life, he became concerned. About Daniel, Samuel looked at me. Very much. I felt cold. Richard never told me. He didn't want to create conflict. My husband had seen something, years ago. Something I had missed. Samuel stood and walked toward a filing cabinet. He removed several folders. Richard visited me 3 times before he died. I swallowed. What did he say? Samuel opened one file. He wanted to make sure you would always be protected. I looked down. My eyes began filling with tears. Even after death, Richard was still trying to take care of me. Samuel continued. He specifically mentioned the house. The house. He said it represented your entire life. I remembered Richard standing on ladders, painting walls, installing shelves, repairing windows. That house truly was his life's work. Samuel sighed. There was another file. My heart skipped. The envelope? He nodded. Yes. Claire took it. I know. I stared at him. You know? He leaned forward. She called my office 2 months ago. I could not believe it. Claire called you. Yes. What did she want? She asked if Richard left any special instructions. I felt sick. What did you tell her? I told her certain documents were stored off-site. My hands tightened. Did Daniel know? Samuel nodded slowly. I believe so. Suddenly, everything became clearer. The papers, The signatures, the missing envelope, the pressure, the urgency. Daniel had been searching for something, and Richard had known it existed. "Where is it?" I asked. Samuel looked uncomfortable. "That's the problem." "What problem?" "The storage company changed ownership several years ago." My heart dropped. "The documents are missing. We're not sure. Richard trusted you." His expression softened. "And I intend to honor that trust." He picked up the phone. After several calls, he finally reached someone. He spent 20 minutes asking questions. Dates, boxes, storage numbers. When he hung up, he looked at me. "There may still be records." "May." He nodded. The documents were placed inside a secure archive box. When, about 6 months before Richard died, I suddenly remembered something. Richard spent several afternoons away from home during that period. He told me he had business to finish. I never asked questions. I trusted him. Samuel opened another file. Inside were handwritten notes. Richard's handwriting. I recognized it immediately. My eyes filled with tears. Samuel handed me one page. It said, "If Audrey ever feels pressured regarding the house, tell her not to sign anything else." I could barely breathe. Richard had written that years ago. Samuel looked at me carefully. "Did you sign anything recently?" I nodded. "Several documents." His face became serious. "Do you have copies?" "No." "Did they give you copies?" "No." He became quiet. Then he said something that frightened me. "That concerns me." "Why?" "Because legitimate transactions leave paper trails." I suddenly remembered Daniel collecting every document after I signed. He never left anything with me. Not once. Samuel opened the eviction notice again. "This is not a court order." I looked up. "What?" "This is a legal notice." "I don't understand. It doesn't remove you from your house." Hope appeared. "Really? No one can simply throw you out." I almost cried. "But they said, they want you to believe you have no options." I sat quietly. For weeks, I had felt helpless. For the first time, someone was telling me I still had rights. Samuel looked directly at me. "Audrey, do not leave your home." My voice shook. "What if they force me?" "They can't." "What if Claire comes?" "Then she comes." "What if Daniel threatens me? Call me." I nodded. He reached into his desk. He removed an old photograph. Richard and Samuel stood beside our house during construction. Richard was smiling. He held a hammer. I had never seen the picture. He gave me this. When? A week before he died. I touched the photograph. Samuel smiled sadly. He said one thing. "What?" Samuel looked toward the window. He said, "If Audrey ever stands alone, remind her that she never truly is." I started crying, not because I felt weak, because Richard had somehow prepared for a day neither of us imagined. After several minutes, Samuel cleared his throat. There is one more thing. I wiped my eyes. What? The archive company opens tomorrow. My heart started beating faster. The documents? Possibly. And if they're there? He looked directly at me. Then your husband may have left you something Daniel never expected. I drove home feeling different. Not safe. Not yet. But stronger. When I entered the house, I noticed a black SUV parked across the street. Daniel sat inside, watching. The engine was running. He saw me. I saw him. Neither of us moved. Finally, he drove away. Inside the house, my answering machine contained 2 messages. The first was Claire. Mom, please call me. The second was Daniel. His voice was calm. We should discuss your moving arrangements. Moving arrangements. As if the decision had already been made. I deleted the message. Then I called Samuel. He was outside my house. Samuel became silent. Finally, he said, Audrey, I think we're running out of time. I spent the next morning sitting in Samuel Carter's office. Outside, the sky was dark. Rain covered the windows. Inside, Samuel was making phone calls. I could hear only parts of the conversations. Yes. Hamilton file. No. The archive number is different. Please check again. Every minute felt longer than the last. Finally, Samuel hung up. The storage company found the record. I sat forward. The documents. Possibly. My heart started racing. When can we get them? This afternoon. For the first time in weeks. I felt hope. But Samuel was not smiling. What is it? He folded his hands. Before we look for Richard's documents, I want to understand Daniel. I frowned. What do you mean? I don't think this is only about your house. It isn't. No. He opened his laptop. I made a few phone calls. I felt nervous. What did you find? Samuel turned the screen toward me. Several articles appeared. Construction projects, real estate companies, court records, and Daniel Bennett's name. I stared at the screen. What is this? 2 investment projects failed. I felt cold. How bad? Samuel sighed. Very bad. One project had gone bankrupt. Another had lawsuits. Contractors claimed they had not been paid. Investors had lost money. I looked at Samuel. Claire told me they had some financial problems. This is more than some. He printed several pages. Daniel may owe hundreds of thousands of dollars. I could barely breathe. Claire knows. I don't believe she knows everything. For the first time, my anger shifted. Maybe Claire had not created this situation. Maybe she had followed her husband. Maybe she had believed him. But she still handed me the eviction notice. That truth remained. Samuel pointed to another document, a loan application. I looked closer. Daniel had listed expected future assets. My house appeared. Estimated value. Projected sale. I felt sick. He planned to sell it. Samuel nodded. It appears so. My hands began shaking. Richard's house. My home. My memories. Numbers on a page. Nothing more. Samuel spoke quietly. Predators often look for vulnerable assets. You're calling Daniel a predator. I'm calling him desperate. There was a difference, but not much. I drove home afterward. The entire drive I thought about Claire, my daughter, the little girl who used to sleep beside me during thunderstorms, the teenager who cried after her first heartbreak, the young woman who held my hand at Richard's funeral. Had she really become this person, or had someone changed her that evening? My phone rang. Claire. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. Hello? Her voice sounded weak. Mom. Neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, "Can we talk?" I sat down. Talk. She took a deep breath. Daniel says things have become very emotional. I closed my eyes. Daniel says, again. What do you say? Silence. Claire. I don't know anymore. Those words surprised me. I said nothing. She continued. He says we're doing the right thing. And what do you believe? More silence. Then I heard her crying. I'm so tired. For the first time. She sounded less like a woman and more like my daughter. What happened? She hesitated. Daniel lost money. How much? He won't tell me. Why didn't you tell me? He said everything would recover. I listened. He said the house could save us. The house. Always the house. I asked quietly, did you know about the eviction notice? She began crying. He already prepared it. Before talking to me. Yes, I felt my heart sink. Claire. Why? I thought it was temporary. You thought I would leave my home temporarily. She had no answer. I heard someone in the background. Daniel. His voice. Who are you talking to? Claire became nervous. I have to go. Claire. I'll call later. The line disconnected. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. The next morning, Margaret came over. She brought coffee. She listened while I told her about Daniel's debts. She shook her head. I knew something wasn't right. I looked at her. Do you think Claire is involved? Margaret sat quietly. Honestly, yes. I think Claire is trapped. I looked away. She gave me the eviction notice. Yes. She lied. Yes. She took Richard's envelope. Margaret nodded. But fear changes people. I thought about that. Fear, money, marriage, pressure. How much can one person change before they stop being themselves? Around noon, I drove to Claire's house. I had not planned to go. I simply found myself there. Daniel's car was gone. Only Claire's vehicle sat in the driveway. I knocked. She opened the door. Her eyes were swollen. She looked exhausted. Mom! I stepped inside. The house felt different. Bills covered the kitchen table. Bank letters. Past due notices. Collection envelopes. I looked at my daughter. Claire. She sat down. Then she said something that frightened me. I think Daniel lied to me. I remained silent. He told me the projects were fine. She wiped her eyes. He said investors would come. What happened? He borrowed more money. How much? I don't know. I looked around. For the first time, I realized how scared she was. She was not living comfortably. She was drowning. Why didn't you tell me? She started crying again. Because he said you wouldn't understand. I sat beside her. And the house. He said it would save us. Us. Not me. Not her. Us. Daniel and Claire. Their marriage. Their debt. Their future. At my expense. I asked quietly, "Do you want me out?" She looked shocked. No. Then why? She lowered her head. Because Daniel said if we lost everything, we'd lose each other too. Suddenly, I understood. Fear. She was afraid. Afraid of losing her husband. Afraid of losing her family. Afraid of financial ruin. Daniel had used that fear. Before I could speak. The front door opened. Daniel entered. He stopped immediately. His eyes moved between us. "What are you doing here?" I stood. "Talking to my daughter." He walked into the kitchen. "We already discussed this." "No," I said. "You discussed it." He looked at Claire. "Did you show her the bills?" Claire said nothing. His face changed. He understood. For the first time, I saw anger in his eyes. Real anger. "Claire," she whispered, "I'm tired of lying." The room became silent. Daniel looked at me. Then he said something that sent chills through my body. "You don't understand how serious this is." I answered, "I think I do." "No, Audrey, you don't." He stepped closer. "If this house isn't sold, people get hurt." I stared at him. "What people?" His jaw tightened. He didn't answer, and suddenly I realized something terrifying. Daniel wasn't simply losing money. He was afraid. Truly afraid. And whatever frightened him was bigger than my daughter. Bigger than our family. Maybe even bigger than the house itself. I barely slept that night. Daniel's words kept repeating in my head. If this house isn't sold, people get hurt. Who was he talking about? Investors, lenders, friends, or people far more dangerous? At 6 o'clock the next morning, I called Samuel. He answered immediately. "You sound frightened." "I am." I told him everything. Daniel's anger, his warning, the fear in Claire's eyes. Samuel became quiet. Finally, he said, "I don't think Daniel is bluffing." I sat at my kitchen table. What should I do? Stay in the house? What if they come? Call me. His voice was calm. Mine wasn't. Around 10 o'clock, I noticed a car parked across the street. Not Daniel's SUV. A gray sedan. 2 men sat inside. Neither got out. Neither looked at my house directly. But they stayed. For nearly an hour. When they finally drove away, my hands were shaking. I called Margaret. She came immediately. You shouldn't be alone. I don't know what's happening. She looked through the window. Neither do I. At noon, Claire called. Her voice sounded exhausted. Mom, Daniel wants to meet. No. Please. No. She started crying. He says things are getting worse. What things? He won't tell me. I felt both angry and sorry for her. Claire, are you afraid of him? Long silence. Then, I don't know anymore. That answer frightened me more than anything. Around 3 o'clock, I heard a vehicle outside. I looked through the curtains. A real estate company's car. A man in a suit stepped out. Another woman carried a clipboard. My stomach dropped. They walked toward my front door. I opened it before they knocked. The man smiled. Mrs. Hamilton. Yes. I'm David Larson with Heritage Realty. I stared at him. What do you want? He looked confused. We're here to evaluate the property. What property? He looked down at his papers. Your home? I felt cold. Who sent you? He hesitated. Mr. Daniel Bennett? For several seconds, I could not speak. Daniel had sent real estate agents to my house. My home. Without permission. The woman said politely, We only need 30 minutes. I stepped outside. No. The man seemed uncomfortable. We were told. I don't care what you were told. Margaret suddenly appeared beside me. He said no. The man looked embarrassed. We apologize. They returned to their car. As they drove away, I felt anger replacing fear. Daniel had crossed another line. He was acting as if my house already belonged to him. An hour later, Claire arrived. She came alone. She looked terrible. Dark circles under her eyes. Her hands shaking. She walked inside quietly. Mom. I did not answer. She sat down. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then she finally said, He sent realtors. Yes. I didn't know. I looked at her. I don't know what to believe anymore. She started crying. Neither do I. She opened her purse. Inside were unpaid bills, credit cards, collection notices, past due loans. She placed them on the table. There are more. I stared at the numbers. Thousands. Tens of thousands. Maybe more. Claire. He kept borrowing. Why? He said the next deal would fix everything. I looked at my daughter. The confident woman I knew was disappearing. Fear had replaced her. He told me we could save everything if we sold your house. I felt tears in my eyes. My house isn't responsible for his mistakes. She nodded. I know. For the first time since all this began, she actually said it. I know. But it was almost too late. Suddenly, the front door opened. Daniel walked inside. His face immediately hardened. What are you doing? Claire stood. "We're talking." His eyes moved toward the bills. "You showed her?" Claire didn't answer. He looked at me. "You shouldn't interfere." I almost laughed. "My own house. My own daughter." He stepped closer. "You don't understand the situation." I stood. "Then explain it." He remained silent. "Who are those men?" His jaw tightened. "No one." "The car outside?" "No one." "The real estate agents." He looked away. For the first time, Daniel looked afraid. Not angry. Afraid. Claire spoke softly. "Who do you owe?" He looked at her. "No one you know?" "How much?" He didn't answer. "Daniel." Still silence. Finally, he whispered, "More than we have." Claire sat down. I could see her heart breaking. He had lied to her. For months. Maybe years. Suddenly, his phone rang. He looked at the screen. His face changed. He walked outside. But the kitchen window was open, and I heard enough. "I need more time." Pause. "The house isn't sold yet." Long silence. I said, "I'm trying." My blood ran cold. The house. He was talking about my house. He returned inside several minutes later. Claire looked at him. "Who was that?" "No one." She stood. "No more lies." He looked exhausted. "They invested." "Who?" "People." "What people?" He rubbed his face. "They financed the projects." I asked quietly, "Did you promise them my house?" He looked at me, and for several seconds, nobody moved. Finally, he said, "I thought I could fix everything." That wasn't an answer, but it was close enough. Claire started crying. "You used my mother's house." He sat down. I had no choice. I felt anger rise inside me. Everyone has choices. Richard taught me that. You may not like your choices, but they still exist. The doorbell rang. Everyone froze. I walked to the door. Samuel Carter stood outside. Behind him was a young man carrying several archive boxes. Samuel entered slowly. His eyes moved across the room. He saw Daniel. He saw Claire. He saw me. Then he placed one hand on a dusty gray box. "I found it." Nobody spoke. Samuel looked directly at Daniel, then at me. "Richard left instructions." My heart started pounding. The room became silent. Even Daniel said nothing. Samuel carefully opened the box. Inside sat several folders, a sealed envelope, and a worn leather binder. My husband's handwriting appeared across the front. Property protection. Samuel looked at me. "Audrey." My hands shook. "Yes." He slowly lifted the binder and said the words that changed everything. "I think your husband knew this day would come." Nobody moved. The entire kitchen became silent. Rain tapped against the windows. The old clock in the hallway ticked loudly. Samuel Carter stood beside the table with Richard's archive box in front of him. Daniel looked nervous. Claire looked frightened. I could barely breathe. Samuel slowly removed the first folder. Dust covered the edges. My husband's handwriting appeared across the top. Richard Hamilton. My eyes filled with tears. I had not seen his handwriting in years. Samuel looked at me. "Would you like to read this?" I nodded. My hands shook as I opened the folder. Inside was a letter. The paper had turned slightly yellow. At the top, it said, "For Audrey." I immediately recognized Richard's voice in the words. "My dearest Audrey, if you are reading this, something has happened that made you feel alone. I hope I am wrong. I pray I am wrong. But if I am not, I need you to trust Samuel." Tears rolled down my face. Claire began crying quietly. Daniel said nothing. I continued reading. "You have spent your entire life taking care of everyone else. One day, you may need someone to protect you, since I may not be there. I have tried to do it myself." My hands were trembling. I looked at Samuel. "What did he do?" Samuel opened another folder. "He made several legal arrangements." Daniel finally spoke. "What arrangements?" Samuel ignored him. Instead, he handed me another document. It was dated 8 months before Richard died. I remembered that period. Richard had been very sick, but he still insisted on visiting Samuel several times. At the time, he told me, "I'm taking care of unfinished business." I never asked questions. Now I wished I had. Samuel pointed toward several pages. "Richard became concerned after meeting Daniel." Daniel's face changed. "What does that mean?" Samuel looked directly at him. "Richard thought you were too interested in the house." Nobody spoke. I looked at Daniel. He looked away. Claire whispered, "Dad never said anything." Samuel nodded. He didn't want conflict. He opened another envelope. Inside were handwritten notes. Richard had written observations. Daniel asked about house value. Daniel asked about insurance. Daniel asked about ownership. Daniel discussed future property decisions. Every page felt like a warning. Claire looked shocked. "He noticed all this?" Samuel nodded. "Yes. I remembered several conversations. At the time, they seemed harmless. Richard apparently saw something I didn't." Samuel removed a small leather notebook. He opened it carefully. This belonged to Richard. Inside were dates, appointments, legal notes. Then I saw something that made me stop breathing. "Protect Audrey's occupancy rights." I looked at Samuel. "What does that mean?" He sat down. "It means Richard wanted to guarantee that nobody could remove you from the house." Daniel suddenly leaned forward. "She signed transfer documents." Samuel finally looked at him. "Perhaps." Daniel's voice became stronger. "She transferred interests." Samuel calmly replied, "Perhaps." I noticed something. For the first time since this began, Daniel looked worried. Not confident. Worried. Samuel opened another folder. Inside sat a sealed envelope. Across the front, Richard had written, "To be opened only if Audrey is threatened with losing her home." My heart nearly stopped. Samuel carefully broke the seal. Inside were 3 documents. 1 letter, 2 legal papers. Samuel adjusted his glasses. Claire whispered, "What is it?" He looked at her. "Something your father wanted hidden." Daniel shifted in his chair. I noticed sweat on his forehead. Samuel read silently for several minutes. Nobody interrupted. Finally, he looked at me. Richard anticipated this possibility. I felt cold. He knew. He feared it. Claire started crying. "No." Samuel's voice softened. "He loved you." "Then why?" "He believed you could be influenced by the wrong person." Daniel stood. "This is ridiculous." Samuel ignored him. He handed me another letter. "My dearest Audrey, if someone ever tries to convince you that this house belongs to anyone except you, they are lying." I began crying again, because I could hear Richard's voice. He was still protecting me, years after his death. Claire whispered, "I didn't know." I looked at her. Part of me believed her. Part of me didn't. Samuel continued reading. Richard described the house, the kitchen, the porch, the bedroom, the garden. He wrote that these things belonged to our life together. Not to money, not to inheritance, not to greed. Daniel suddenly spoke. "What exactly are these documents?" Samuel looked at him. "Documents you apparently hoped never existed." Daniel's face hardened. "I have legal agreements." Samuel nodded. "And Richard had lawyers." The room became silent again. Margaret arrived shortly afterward. I had forgotten she was coming. She entered quietly. She immediately noticed the box. "What is this?" Samuel answered. "Richard speaking from beyond the grave." Nobody smiled. The atmosphere was too heavy. Samuel opened the final folder. Inside sat a thick document. Several pages. Official seals. Signatures. Notarized records. My heartbeat became louder. "What is that?" Samuel took a deep breath. "A property agreement." Daniel immediately said, "She signed later documents." Samuel nodded. "Yes." Daniel looked relieved. But Samuel continued. "The question is whether those documents could legally override Richard's agreement." Nobody moved. Claire looked at Samuel. "Can they?" He did not answer. Not immediately. Instead, he carefully placed the document back into the folder. "I need to review everything." Daniel stood. "We've already started legal proceedings." Yeah. Samuel looked at him. "And she received notice." Samuel smiled slightly. "A notice isn't a judgment." Daniel's expression changed. For weeks, Daniel had acted like victory was certain. Now uncertainty appeared. He picked up his coat. "Claire, let's go." Claire didn't move. "Claire." She looked at me, then at him. "I want to stay." He stared at her. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then he walked toward the door. Before leaving, he turned toward Samuel. "What happens next?" Samuel answered quietly. "Next, we read every word Richard left behind." The front door closed. Daniel was gone. The house became quiet again. Claire sat beside me. She looked like a child, a frightened child. I didn't know. I looked at her. I want to believe you, she cried. I love Dad. I know. He never trusted Daniel, Samuel answered. He trusted you. That sentence broke her. She covered her face and cried harder, because suddenly she understood. Richard never feared his daughter. He feared the man she married. Samuel finally picked up the thick legal document. He looked directly at me. Audrey. Yes. I think I found what Richard was protecting. My heart began racing. What is it? He slowly turned to the first page, and for the first time, I saw the words Life Estate Protection Agreement. I barely slept that night. Richard's document sat on my kitchen table. The words Life Estate Protection Agreement kept repeating in my mind. Samuel had taken the file home to review it carefully before leaving. He told me, tomorrow morning, my office, 9 o'clock. I knew what that meant. The fight was beginning. At 8:30 the next morning, I arrived at Samuel's office. The sky was clear for the first time in days, but my stomach felt heavy. Samuel greeted me quietly. Claire sat in the waiting room. She looked exhausted. She had barely spoken to Daniel since the previous evening. Mom! I nodded. She looked down. Neither of us knew what to say. At exactly 9 o'clock, Daniel arrived. He was not alone. A younger attorney walked beside him carrying a briefcase. The man introduced himself. Michael Reeves. Samuel shook his hand. Samuel Carter. Nobody smiled. We entered the conference room. A large table sat in the center. Samuel sat beside me. Claire sat across from us. Daniel and his attorney sat together. The atmosphere felt less like a family meeting and more like a trial. Samuel opened several folders. Michael Reeves spoke first. My clients have legitimate ownership interests. Samuel nodded. Perhaps. Daniel leaned forward. Audrey signed the transfer documents. I remained silent. Samuel answered. That question is not the only issue. Michael opened his briefcase. He placed several papers on the table. Mrs. Hamilton voluntarily transferred portions of the property interests. Samuel studied the documents. He turned several pages. Then he looked at me. Did anyone explain these documents to you? No. Did you have independent legal advice? No. Were you given copies? No. Michael interrupted. That doesn't invalidate the signatures. Samuel remained calm. Perhaps not. The same answer again. Perhaps. Daniel was becoming frustrated. He crossed his arms. The house cannot remain like this. I looked at him. Why not? He hesitated. His attorney answered instead. My clients face financial difficulties. My clients, not my daughter, not my family. Clients. The conversation had become entirely about money. Samuel finally opened Richard's file. Daniel immediately became tense. What is that? Samuel looked at him. A document your father-in-law paid for. Claire stared at the folder. My father, Samuel nodded. He anticipated certain circumstances. Daniel laughed softly. Richard died 7 years ago. Samuel's eyes remained steady. Fortunately, legal documents survive longer than people. Nobody spoke. Samuel removed the life estate protection agreement. Several official seals covered the pages, original signatures, witness signatures, notary stamps. Everything looked official. Michael Reeves reached for the document. Samuel handed it to him. He began reading. His expression slowly changed. Daniel noticed. "What is it?" The attorney continued reading. More pages? More silence. Daniel became impatient. "Michael," the attorney finally looked up. "Where did you get this?" Samuel answered. "Richard Hamilton?" Daniel leaned forward. "What is it?" Michael did not answer immediately. Instead, he continued reading. The room suddenly felt smaller. Claire looked frightened. I could hear my own heartbeat. Finally, Michael placed the document down. He looked directly at Samuel. "This was recorded." "Yes." "When?" "8 months before Richard's death." Michael nodded slowly. Daniel looked confused. "Someone tell me what's happening." Samuel folded his hands. "This agreement may affect every document Audrey signed." Daniel stared. "What?" Michael spoke carefully. "I need to review the language." Samuel smiled slightly. "Please do." The young attorney read several pages again. I watched Daniel. For the first time since all this began, his confidence disappeared. His fingers tapped against the table. His jaw tightened. Sweat appeared on his forehead. Claire noticed it too. "Daniel." He ignored her. Samuel turned toward me. "Audrey, I want you to answer honestly." "Of course." "Did anyone tell you that signing those documents could affect your ownership rights?" "No." "Did Claire explain them?" "No." "Did Daniel explain them?" "No." "Did either of them recommend you hire your own attorney?" "No." Michael wrote several notes. Daniel looked nervous. The attorney finally spoke. "The transfer documents may face challenges." Daniel stared at him. "What?" Michael looked uncomfortable. "There could be issues." "What issues?" He pointed at Richard's agreement. "This document creates certain protections." Samuel added, "Very strong protections." Daniel suddenly raised his voice. "She signed." Samuel looked directly at him. "And Richard planned ahead." Silence. The room became very quiet. Claire began crying. "I didn't know." Nobody answered, because at that moment everyone understood something. Richard had seen danger years before anyone else. Samuel opened another letter. This was attached to the agreement. He began reading. "If anyone attempts to pressure Audrey to leave the family home during her lifetime, that action shall be considered a violation of my expressed wishes." My eyes filled with tears. Claire covered her mouth. Daniel looked away. Samuel continued. "The family home exists to protect Audrey, not to profit from her." Richard's voice filled the room. Even after death, even after years, he was still speaking. Michael Reeves slowly removed his glasses. He looked at Daniel. "When did you become aware of this agreement?" Daniel swallowed. "I wasn't." When did Claire know? Claire whispered, I didn't. Samuel looked at Daniel. Then why did you send realtors? No answer. Why the eviction notice? No answer. Why the retirement facility? Daniel finally spoke. I was trying to solve problems. Samuel nodded. With Audrey's house? Again. Silence. My daughter looked at her husband. The man she trusted. The man she defended. The man who told her that selling my home would save them. For the first time, she looked afraid of him. Daniel stood. This is ridiculous. Michael remained seated. I think we should continue. Daniel looked at his attorney. What? He spoke carefully. I want to finish reviewing the agreement. Samuel slowly turned another page. Then he stopped. He looked directly at me, then at Claire, then at Daniel. His expression changed. What is it? I asked. He placed one finger on a paragraph. I believe I found the provision Richard was most concerned about. My heart started racing. Daniel looked pale. Claire stopped crying. Samuel adjusted his glasses. Michael leaned forward. The room became completely silent. Samuel finally said, This clause changes everything. Nobody spoke. Samuel's finger rested on a single paragraph. The room felt frozen. Daniel stared at the document. Claire wiped tears from her face. I could hear the clock on Samuel's office wall. Tick, tick, tick. Finally. Samuel looked up. This is the clause Richard wanted protected. My heart was pounding. What does it say? Samuel adjusted his glasses. He began reading slowly. During the lifetime of Audrey Hamilton, she shall possess absolute and uninterrupted residential rights within the family home. No person, heir, beneficiary, spouse, creditor, or representative may remove, relocate, pressure, or otherwise interfere with her occupancy. Daniel immediately sat forward. What? Samuel continued. Any transfer, assignment, sale, encumbrance, or conveyance affecting said property shall require independent legal representation and written approval from Audrey Hamilton. I felt my hands shaking. Claire looked confused. What does that mean? Samuel looked directly at her. It means your mother could not legally sign away these rights without her own attorney. Daniel interrupted. She signed. Samuel nodded. Without independent legal counsel. Michael Reeves lowered his eyes. Daniel turned toward him. What is he talking about? The young attorney answered carefully. This clause creates a protected life estate. Daniel frowned. What does that mean? It means Audrey has the right to live in the home for the rest of her life. I felt tears forming. Samuel continued. Nobody can remove her. Claire whispered. Nobody. Samuel shook his head. No one. Daniel looked stunned. The transfer documents, Michael interrupted, may not override this agreement. Daniel stared at him. What do you mean, may not? The attorney took a deep breath. They probably don't. The room became silent. For weeks. For months. I had believed I was losing everything. Now the truth was slowly appearing. Richard had protected me. Samuel turned another page. There is more. Daniel closed his eyes. Of course there was. Richard had always been thorough. Samuel read again. Should any beneficiary knowingly attempt to force Audrey Hamilton from the residence, that beneficiary shall immediately forfeit any inheritance interest granted under this agreement. Claire gasped. I looked at Samuel. What does that mean? He answered quietly. It means Richard included a penalty. Claire looked frightened. Penalty? Samuel nodded. If someone knowingly attempts to remove Audrey from the house, they lose their inheritance rights. Daniel became pale. Claire stared at the document. My father wrote this. Yes. Against me. Samuel shook his head. No. Then why? Samuel looked at her kindly. To protect your mother. Claire began crying again, because suddenly she understood. Richard had never stopped loving her, but he loved me too, and he refused to let anyone hurt me. Daniel stood up. This is ridiculous. Samuel looked at him. Sit down. For the first time, Daniel actually listened. Samuel continued reading. Richard had written an additional statement. If Claire ever finds herself influenced by fear, pressure, debt, or manipulation, I ask that Audrey remember the daughter she raised before making final judgments. The room became quiet. Claire covered her mouth. My eyes filled with tears. Even now, even after death, Richard was protecting both of us. He knew. He somehow knew. Claire whispered, he knew Daniel. Samuel answered, he worried about him. Daniel suddenly spoke. He barely knew me. Samuel looked directly at him. He knew enough. Nobody said anything. Michael Reeves slowly closed his folder. He no longer looked confident. He looked concerned, very concerned. Daniel turned toward him. Tell them. Michael sighed. The eviction notice cannot proceed. Daniel stared. What? The occupancy rights remain. No. The documents you used appear insufficient. Daniel stood again. I invested money, Samuel answered calmly. With Audrey's house. I was trying to save my family. Claire looked at him. No. He turned toward her. Claire. You used my mother. His face changed. For the first time, he looked completely defeated. Samuel opened another envelope. Inside sat several notarized pages. What are those? I asked. He handed them to Michael. The attorney read silently. His face became serious. Very serious. Daniel noticed. What now? Michael looked uncomfortable. There are additional provisions. What provisions? The attorney swallowed. If coercion or financial manipulation is proven, the responsible parties may face civil liability. Daniel looked shocked. What? Samuel answered. Richard anticipated financial pressure. I could barely believe it. My husband had predicted everything, years earlier, before his illness, before his death, before any of this happened. Claire whispered. Dad knew. Samuel nodded. He hoped he was wrong. The room became quiet again. I remembered Richard sitting in his chair, reading, thinking, watching people carefully. He always noticed things I missed. Always. Suddenly, Claire turned toward me. She was crying harder now. Mom! I looked at her. I'm sorry. Her voice broke. I didn't know. Part of me wanted to hold her. Part of me still hurt, because she had handed me the eviction notice. She had watched me cry. She had asked me to leave. And yet, sitting there, she looked exactly like the little girl who once ran into my bedroom after nightmares. Samuel placed one hand on the file. There is one final section. Daniel looked exhausted. Claire looked frightened. I looked at Richard's handwriting. Samuel began reading. My greatest fear is not that Audrey loses the house. My greatest fear is that she believes she has lost her family. Tears rolled down my face. Samuel continued. If this document is ever opened, I ask Claire to remember who she was before money entered her life. Claire completely broke down. She buried her face in her hands. Daniel said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The truth was sitting on the table. Richard had seen it. Samuel had preserved it. And now, everyone had to face it. Michael Reeves finally stood. He collected his papers. Daniel looked at him. Where are you going? He answered quietly. I think you need different advice. Daniel stared. What does that mean? The attorney looked directly at him. It means the situation is much worse than you thought. Samuel closed the file. The room became silent one final time. I looked at Richard's signature, his handwriting, his careful planning. Even after 7 years, he was still sitting beside me, still protecting me, still keeping his promise. Then Samuel looked directly at Daniel and said, Now we need to discuss what happens to someone who tried to break this agreement. Nobody left the conference room. Daniel sat perfectly still. Samuel's words still hung in the air. What happens to someone who tried to break this agreement for the first time? Daniel looked scared. Real fear. Not anger. Not frustration. Fear. Michael Reeves opened the document again. He read several pages quietly, and finally, he looked at Daniel. I think you need to answer some questions. Daniel crossed his arms. I'm not answering anything. Samuel remained calm. Then I'll ask anyway. Nobody moved. The room had become a courtroom, and Richard was somehow still the strongest voice inside it. Samuel opened a folder. When did you first discuss selling Audrey's house? Daniel remained silent. When did you prepare the transfer documents? No answer. When did you contact the real estate company? Still nothing. Claire suddenly spoke. Answer him. Daniel looked at his wife. Claire. No. She wiped tears from her eyes. No more lies. He looked away. Samuel continued. Did you disclose your financial problems to Audrey? No. Did you explain the document she signed? No. Did you recommend independent legal advice? No. Michael slowly closed his eyes, because every answer made the situation worse. I sat quietly. Part of me felt angry. Part of me felt tired. Mostly, I felt disappointed. Daniel finally spoke. I was trying to save my family. Samuel nodded. By risking Audrey's home, I planned to pay everything back. With what money? Daniel said nothing. Claire looked at him. How much do we owe? He remained silent. She raised her voice. How much? Finally, he answered. $380,000. The room became silent. Claire looked shocked. What? I was trying to fix it. You told me 80,000. Daniel lowered his head. I couldn't tell you. Claire started crying again. Everything she believed was collapsing. Her marriage, her finances, her trust. Samuel asked another question. Did you promise your creditors the house? Daniel immediately answered. No. But he answered too quickly. Michael looked at him. Daniel. Nobody moved. The young attorney finally said, You need to answer honestly. Daniel looked exhausted. He rubbed his face. Then he whispered, I discussed it. Claire stared at him. You what? I thought we would inherit it. You promised my mother's house. He said nothing. That silence answered everything. I suddenly remembered the phone call I overheard. The house isn't sold yet. Now I understood. There were people waiting. People expecting money. People expecting my home. Samuel leaned forward. Who are they? Daniel hesitated. Private lenders. Names. He shook his head. How much do you owe them? 100,000. Claire looked physically ill. She stood up. You borrowed from private lenders. I had no choice. There is always a choice. Her voice sounded stronger now. For the first time in months, she was no longer afraid. She was angry, and she had every right. Samuel opened another file. Richard anticipated debt. Daniel looked confused. What? He specifically mentioned financial pressure. I looked at Samuel. He wrote about this. Samuel nodded. He believed money could influence people. Claire whispered, Dad knew. Samuel looked at her kindly. He hoped he was wrong. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Outside, rain began falling again. I watched the water slide down the windows. Richard loved rainy days. He always said rain slowed people down, made them think. Perhaps he was right. Michael finally broke the silence. Oh, I believe the eviction effort should end immediately. Daniel looked at him. What? You cannot continue. I already started the process. The process is over. Daniel stood. No. Michael remained seated. The agreement is enforceable. What about the signed papers? They may be challenged. What about ownership interests? The life estate overrides occupancy issues. Daniel looked completely defeated. Everything he believed had disappeared, but the worst part was still coming. Samuel removed one final document. I think Audrey deserves to know. I looked at him. What is it? He handed me several pages. They were bank records, loan applications, financial statements. Daniel's signature appeared everywhere. Then I saw something. My name. I looked closer. My house, estimated future sale proceeds, projected inheritance, collateral expectations. I could barely breathe. Daniel had used my future inheritance as part of his financial plans. Without asking me, without telling me. Claire read over my shoulder. She suddenly stepped backward. Oh my God! Daniel stood up. Claire? She looked at him. You used my mother's house. I thought, no. Her voice became firm. You don't get to say that anymore. For the first time, Daniel had no answer. Samuel quietly closed the files. Audrey? Yes? Legally. You're protected. I felt tears filling my eyes. Protected. After months of fear. After weeks of believing I would lose everything. Protected. But emotionally, things were more complicated. Claire sat beside me. She looked broken. I don't expect forgiveness. I said nothing. She continued. I signed papers. Yes. I trusted him. Yes. I hurt you. My voice finally came. Yes. She began crying again. I don't know how to fix this. Neither did I. Because forgiveness isn't a document. You cannot sign it. You cannot file it. You cannot force it. You earn it. Slowly. Painfully. Daniel finally picked up his coat. Nobody stopped him. He looked at Claire. Are you coming? She looked at him for a very long time. Then she quietly said, No. His face changed. Claire. No. He looked at me, then at Samuel, then at the files. Everything he wanted was gone. The house, the money, the plan. He walked toward the door. Before leaving, he stopped. I'm sorry. No one answered. The door closed, and for the first time in months, the room felt lighter. Claire sat quietly beside me. Samuel gathered the papers. Michael prepared to leave. Outside. The rain finally stopped. As we stood up, Samuel handed me one last envelope. I recognized Richard's handwriting. For Audrey only. I looked at him. What is this? Samuel smiled gently. He told me to give you this only after the truth came out. My hands trembled, because after everything that had happened, after all the fear and betrayal, Richard still had one final message waiting for me. I did not open Richard's final letter that day. I couldn't. Too much had already happened. Too much had broken. Daniel had left Samuel's office. Claire sat beside me, and for the first time in months, nobody was talking about my house. They were talking about consequences. Samuel slowly placed every document back into the folders. Michael Reeves remained seated. He looked tired, very tired. Finally, he spoke. Daniel needs legal representation. Samuel nodded. I agree. Claire looked confused. What does that mean? Michael took a deep breath. It means this situation may become much more serious. I looked at Samuel. What kind of serious? He answered carefully. The attempted eviction. The property documents. The financial disclosures. The pressure. He folded his hands. Some actions involving elderly property owners can create legal exposure. Claire became pale. Is my husband in trouble? Samuel answered honestly. He could be. Nobody spoke. The room had become very quiet again. I looked at my daughter. She looked completely lost. Not angry, not defensive, just lost. She had trusted her husband, and now she was discovering that almost everything had been a lie. Her marriage, their finances, their future. Daniel had built everything on secrets. Samuel stood. I think everyone should go home. But before we left, Michael asked one final question. Claire, do you have copies of Daniel's messages? She looked surprised. Messages, texts, emails, financial discussions. She hesitated. Yes. Samuel looked at her. Keep them. Michael nodded. Do not delete anything. For the first time, Claire understood. This was no longer simply a family argument. This had become evidence. Outside, the afternoon sun had finally appeared. Claire and I stood beside our cars. Neither of us moved. Finally, she spoke. Mom. I looked at her. I don't know what to say. I answered honestly. Neither do I. She started crying. I hurt you. Yes. I believed him. Yes. She looked down. I don't think I know my husband. I wanted to comfort her, but my own pain was still too fresh. Instead, I said, You need to find out. She nodded, and then she drove away. That evening, I returned home. My house felt different, safer. For weeks, I had walked through every room, wondering when I would lose it. Now the walls felt solid again. Richard had protected me. His hands had built the house. His mind had saved it. I sat in his chair, the same chair he used every evening. The final envelope rested on the table. For Audrey only. I touched it, but I still couldn't open it. Not yet. At 7 o'clock, Margaret arrived. She carried soup, as always. When I told her everything, she sat quietly. Finally, she smiled. I knew Richard was smarter than all of them. I laughed for the first time in weeks. He certainly was. She looked around the room. He saved you. Yes. But then I said something unexpected. He also saved Claire. Margaret nodded. Because Richard had seen exactly what happened. He had protected me, but he had also left room for his daughter to come back. That night, my phone rang. Daniel. I stared at the screen. I almost ignored it. Then I answered. Hello? His voice sounded different. No confidence, No control, only exhaustion. Audrey. I said nothing. I made mistakes. Still nothing. I never wanted to hurt you. I finally spoke. You sent me an eviction notice. Silence. You brought real estate agents. Silence. You told my daughter to remove me from my home. He breathed heavily. I was desperate. I looked around Richard's office. The photographs, the books, the lamp. Desperation does not excuse cruelty. I lost everything. His voice broke. My business. My money. My investors. My marriage. I answered quietly. You lost those things before you came after my house. Long silence. Finally, he asked, Did Claire stay with you? No. Another silence. I think she's leaving me. I didn't answer, because the truth was simple. Claire was making her own decisions now. For the first time in a long time. He whispered, I loved her. I said, Then you should have protected her. The call ended, and strangely, I felt no anger, only sadness, because greed rarely arrives looking evil. Sometimes it arrives looking frightened. The following morning, Claire appeared at my door, alone. No makeup, no jewelry, no wedding ring. I opened the door. She stood there, holding a small box. Can I come in? I nodded. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she once asked me to sign papers. She pushed the box toward me. What is this? Daniel's phone. I looked at her. He left last night. What? He packed his clothes. She took a deep breath. He said I chose you over him. I said nothing. She opened the box. Inside sat documents, printouts, bank statements, loan papers, text messages. She looked at me. You deserve the truth. For nearly 2 hours, we read everything. There were messages between Daniel and investors, messages about deadlines, messages about debts, and then we found something else, a message from Daniel. If Audrey won't agree, we may have to pressure her. My hands became cold. Claire started crying. Another message. Once the house sells, everything changes. Another. Claire doesn't need to know everything yet. My daughter buried her face in her hands. He lied to me. I sat beside her. For the first time in months, I touched her shoulder. She immediately started crying harder. I'm sorry. I closed my eyes. Because I finally saw it. The little girl, my daughter, she was still there. Hidden beneath fear, beneath debt, beneath manipulation. She looked up at me. What do I do now? I answered honestly. You tell the truth. She nodded. I will. That afternoon, Claire called Samuel. She offered every message, every document, every email, everything, because she finally understood something. The only way to rebuild a life is with truth. As the sun began to set, I finally picked up Richard's final envelope. I looked at his handwriting. My fingers trembled. Claire sat quietly beside me. For the first time in months, my daughter and I sat together in peace. And then I carefully broke the seal. My hands trembled as I opened Richard's final letter. Claire sat beside me. The kitchen was quiet. The sun was setting outside. For the first time in months, nobody was arguing. Nobody was talking about lawyers. Nobody was talking about the house. Only Richard. Only his words. I unfolded the paper. His handwriting looked exactly the same. Strong. Careful. Steady. My dearest Audrey, if you are reading this, then life became harder than I hoped. I stopped. My eyes filled with tears. Claire quietly reached for a tissue. I continued. I know you. You will blame yourself. You will ask what you did wrong. Please don't. Nothing that happened is your fault. You loved people. You trusted people. That is not weakness. That is who you are. I could barely see the page. Richard knew me better than anyone. Always. The letter continued. If Claire made mistakes, remember that fear can make good people do bad things. But fear does not have to be the end of their story. Claire started crying beside me. I kept reading. If Daniel caused pain, let the law deal with him. You do not need revenge. You only need peace. I stopped again, because that was Richard. Even in pain, even in fear, he always chose peace. The final paragraph read, "Stay in our home. Open the windows every spring. Plant roses every summer. Sit on the porch every evening. And when you think of me, do not remember my last days. Remember our best days." I could not speak. Neither could Claire. After several minutes, she whispered, "He knew." I nodded. He always knew. She began crying again. "I'm sorry, Mom." For the first time, I placed my arm around her, not because everything was healed, not because the pain had disappeared, but because Richard had asked me to remember my daughter. And I did. The next morning, Samuel called. "I received additional information." "What kind?" "Daniel's creditors." I felt cold again. "What happened?" "Several lenders have started legal actions." "Against him?" "Yes." I sat down. The truth was finally catching him. Years of debt. Years of lies. Years of bad decisions. And now everything was collapsing. Samuel continued. "Claire is not personally responsible for most of the debt." I felt relieved. At least my daughter still had a chance. "What happens now?" "There may be settlements. And Daniel." Samuel paused. "He has difficult months ahead." That afternoon, Claire returned. She carried 2 boxes. "What are these?" "My things." I looked at her. "I left." I remained silent. She sat down. "I couldn't stay." "What happened?" She looked exhausted. "He admitted everything." I waited. He borrowed money from private lenders. I know. He told them my mother's house would eventually be sold. I closed my eyes. Even now, hearing it hurt. Claire continued. He believed he could recover the money. And when he couldn't, she looked down. He became desperate. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then she said, I don't expect you to forgive me. I answered honestly, I'm trying. She nodded. That was enough, because healing is slow, very slow. Several days later, Samuel invited us to his office one final time. Claire came with me. Daniel was already there. He looked older. His shoulders were lower. The confidence was gone. Michael Reeves sat beside him. Samuel opened several documents. The eviction matter is officially withdrawn. I took a deep breath. My house, my home, safe. Finally safe. Samuel continued. The transfer documents will be canceled. Claire lowered her head. Daniel said nothing. Michael spoke quietly. My client accepts responsibility. Daniel looked at me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, I'm sorry. The room remained silent. I was afraid. He looked at Claire. I thought I could fix everything. Tears appeared in his eyes. I destroyed everything instead. Claire looked at him, not with anger, not with love, only sadness. Samuel finally asked, Is there anything else? Daniel stood. He looked at me. I loved your daughter. I answered quietly. Then you should have protected her. He nodded. Because he knew. He walked toward the door. Before leaving, he stopped. I'm sorry about Richard. Then he left. And this time, nobody followed him. The following weeks felt different. The lawyers finished their work. The creditors pursued Daniel. Claire began counseling. She found a small apartment. She visited me every Sunday. Slowly, carefully. Like two people learning each other again. One afternoon, we planted flowers together. The same roses Richard loved. Claire suddenly said, I think Dad saved both of us. I smiled. Yes. He saved the house. And our family? She nodded. Because Richard understood something important. A house is made of wood. A family is made of choices. And sometimes people get lost. But sometimes they find their way home. That evening, I sat alone on the porch. The sun was setting. The wind moved through the trees. Richard's wind chime played softly. I looked at the front door. The same door Claire had walked through as a child. The same door where the eviction notice had arrived. The same door that had nearly been closed forever. And then I realized something. I was no longer afraid. Not of losing my house. Not of being alone. Not of tomorrow. Because Richard had left me more than legal papers. He left me courage. He left me protection. He left me love. And as darkness settled across the yard, I whispered the words I had wanted to say for months. You kept your promise. The wind moved gently. The chimes rang once, And for the first time since Richard died, I felt that I was finally home again. Winter arrived quietly that year. The maple trees outside my house lost their leaves. The garden slept beneath a thin layer of frost. And for the first time in many months, I woke up without fear. No eviction notices, no lawyers, no real estate agents, no strangers sitting in cars across the street. Only silence. Good silence, the kind Richard always loved. Every morning, I made coffee in the same kitchen where my daughter once handed me papers that nearly destroyed our family. Sometimes I still looked at that table. It reminded me how quickly life can change. But it also reminded me that truth eventually arrives. Samuel visited often. He became more than Richard's attorney. He became a friend. One afternoon, he sat beside me on the porch. "You look different." I smiled. "I feel different." "How?" I looked toward the yard. "I don't feel afraid anymore." He nodded. "Richard would like that." I laughed softly. "Richard would probably tell me to stop worrying." Samuel smiled. He told me that many times. The legal matters slowly ended. Daniel entered negotiations with his creditors. Several lawsuits followed. The investment companies pursued him. The private lenders pursued him. His business collapsed completely. I heard these things through Samuel. I never asked for details. I did not want revenge. Richard had been right. Peace mattered more. One evening, Daniel called me one final time. His voice sounded tired. Very tired. "Audrey." "Hello." I wanted to say goodbye. I remained quiet. "I'm moving to Arizona." I didn't ask why. "I don't expect forgiveness." I looked through the kitchen window. The sunset painted the yard orange. Finally, I said, "I hope you become a better man." He was silent. Then he whispered, "I loved Claire." I answered gently, "Then learn from what happened." Several seconds passed. "Thank you." The line disconnected. I never heard from him again. Claire's journey was much harder. She moved into a small apartment across town. She found a job at a medical office. She attended counseling. She sold jewelry. She paid her own bills. For the first time in years, she built her own life. Not Daniel's life, her own. At first, she visited every few weeks, then every Sunday, eventually, every Wednesday evening. We started slowly. Tea, dinner, conversations. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. Healing does not happen in one moment. It happens in small moments. One afternoon, we cleaned Richard's workshop. Dust covered everything. His tools still hung on the wall. Claire picked up an old hammer. "Dad loved this one." I smiled. "He refused to replace it." She laughed. The sound surprised both of us, because neither of us had laughed very much. She sat down. "I think I disappointed him." I looked at my daughter. "No." "He knew. He worried." She wiped her eyes. "I became someone I don't recognize." I sat beside her. "We all become strangers to ourselves sometimes." She looked at me. "How did you forgive me?" I thought for a long time. Then I answered honestly, I remembered who you were before you became afraid. Tears filled her eyes, because those words belonged to Richard. He had written them, and now they belonged to both of us. Spring arrived. The roses returned, just as Richard requested. One Saturday morning, Claire and I planted new flowers. The same red roses Richard always loved, the same spot beside the porch. While digging, Claire found something buried beneath the soil, a small metal box. We looked at each other. What is this? I recognized it immediately. Richard's time box. He buried it years ago. Inside were photographs, movie tickets, letters, and one small note. Claire unfolded it. Richard's handwriting appeared again. For my girls. We both smiled. The note said, "If you're reading this together, then everything turned out better than I feared." We started crying immediately, because somehow Richard had done it again. He had reached across time, across grief, across anger, and brought us together. Months later, Claire sat beside me on the porch. The same porch where Richard and I watched storms. The same porch where I once cried because I believed I would lose everything. The evening air felt warm. The wind chime moved softly. Claire looked at me. "Can I ask something?" "Of course." "Will this always hurt?" I thought about Richard, about the papers, about the betrayal, about the fear. Then I answered, "No." She looked surprised. "The memory stays." I touched her hand. "But the pain changes." She smiled, because she understood. As the sun disappeared behind the trees, I realized something important. I had not won because I kept the house. I had won because I kept myself, my dignity, my memories, my marriage, my husband's love, and eventually, my daughter. Richard once told me that a home is not the place where you live. It is the place where you are safe enough to be yourself. For months, I forgot that. Fear made me forget. Betrayal made me forget. But now I understood. The house still stood. The porch still stood. The roses still bloomed. And every evening, I opened the windows exactly as Richard asked. One year after the eviction notice arrived, Claire brought dinner. We sat outside together. The sky turned gold. Birds moved through the trees. She looked at me and smiled. "Dad saved this house?" I looked at the front door, then at the roses, then at my daughter. And I finally answered no. She looked surprised. I squeezed her hand. He saved his family. Sometimes the people who hurt us are not evil. Sometimes they are afraid. Sometimes they are lost. Sometimes they allow money, pressure, or fear to become louder than love. This story taught me several things. First, love should never require surrendering your dignity. Second, trust should never replace wisdom. Third, protecting yourself does not mean you love your family less. Richard understood something very important. He knew that love without boundaries becomes sacrifice, and sacrifice without limits becomes pain. He protected me because he knew that one day I might forget to protect myself. He also protected Claire because he believed people can return from their mistakes. Forgiveness does not happen immediately. It does not erase pain. It does not erase consequences. Forgiveness simply allows healing to begin. If you are a parent, remember that loving your children does not mean giving away everything. If you are a child, remember that your parents are not obstacles, investments, or burdens. They are the people who built the road beneath your feet. And if you are facing betrayal, loss, or fear today, please remember this. You are stronger than the people who try to take your peace. Sometimes justice arrives through courts. Sometimes through truth. Sometimes through love. And sometimes through a promise made many years ago by someone who truly loved you. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts below. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted? What would you have done if you were in Audrey's place? Please tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Your stories mean more than you know. And if you'd like to hear more emotional stories about family, love, forgiveness, and second chances, please like, subscribe, and join me again.